Good morning. It's Sunday, January 9, 2022. Happy New Year and welcome to our first major press briefing here at the Office of the Prime Minister in Kingston, Jamaica. Prime Minister the Most Honorable Andrew Holness will brief the nation on a matter of national importance. The Prime Minister is joined by the Minister of National Security, Dr. the Honorable Horace Chang, the Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of National Security, Senator the Honorable Matthew Samuda. Along with Senator Samuda and Dr. Chang, we also have the Commissioner of Police, Major General Anthony Anderson, the Chief of Defense Staff, Lieutenant General Rocky Meade, and the CDS designate, Commodore Antoinette Weaves Gorman. And of course, the country's Attorney General, Mrs. Marlene Malahoo Fort. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of Jamaica.
Thank you, Naomi. Good morning. Thanks to our journalists for joining us and Jamaicans at home and abroad. The Zones of Special Operations is a legislative tool designed to intervene in circumstances where geographically defined, usually in a limited way, less than a parish, communities have been captured by criminal elements. The communities that we have targeted so far for this kind of intervention are communities with clearly defined infrastructure that allows the police force to put in place certain static and dynamic strategies, such as to set up controls of ingress and egress, conduct searches, and do public order policing. So far, I think we can all agree that the zones of special operations, where they have been implemented, have worked. We initially designed the plan to target the top 20 communities that were plagued with crime and violence in an increasing way, particularly murders, shootings, and gang-related activities. These communities, we now have 5 zones of special operations that have been so far implemented. And as I said, generally, they have been successful. Nothing is perfect, we will admit, and we do have concerns regarding the operation of one particular zone of special operations, which we intend to review in the near future. So the zones of special operations, therefore, are designed as a community building tool. They have working in parallel with them a special social intervention committee, which brings together all the agencies of government that have anything to do with social intervention, from infrastructure to education, employment generation, for proper documentation of citizens, all agencies that have anything to do with community development work alongside the security initiative. I want the country to bear in mind that this is a long-term strategy. Yes, when we do intervene in the communities, you see an immediate reduction in violence. The gangs disperse, the criminals leave the area, they cannot return to conduct their criminal activities. But it is more than that. It is more than a displacement strategy. It is a strategy to harden the area against the return and re-institutionalization of criminality in the communities. So we are building peace in the community. We are building people who will become wardens of the peace. We're giving people opportunity to become employed. We are improving the environment and conditions of the community, particularly garbage collection and improving their built environment, removal of zinc fences, putting in sewage where none existed before, ensuring that water and electricity are regularized. And we believe that this nexus between the security operation and the community development operation will ensure that these communities will sustain the peace for a long period of time. You can imagine that this is therefore a resource-intense activity. And it is a long-term commitment from the JCF and the JDF in men and material. and I should say men, women, and material. It has worked, without question. In the initial stages, persons were skeptical, but we are now here today seeing everyone calling for the implementation of a zone of special operation in their communities. So today, therefore, whereas Section 4.6 of the Act, that is the Zone of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Parade Garden Zone, Order 2022, provides that the Prime Minister and Council may declare an area as a zone if the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Defence Staff have agreed in writing that the area should be so declared. And whereas the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Defence Staff have agreed in writing that the area geographically defined in the schedule, which will be detailed by the Chief of Defence Staff, should be declared as a zone of special operations. Now, therefore, the Prime Minister and Council, having reasonable cause, more than reasonable cause, to believe that due to rampant criminality, gang warfare, escalating violence, and murder, and the threat to the rule of law and public order, it is necessary to declare the area geographically defined, which the Chief of Defence Staff will later outline, as a zone, and hereby declares as follows. 1. This order may be cited as the Law Reform Zone of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Parade Garden Zone, Order 2022. 2. The area having the geographical limits specified in the schedule about to be defined is a zone of special operations for the purposes of the Act. And 3. The said zone shall operate for a period of 60 days. This is, of course, an important formality to publicly declare the zone so that everyone in the area knows that Parade Gardens, which is an area within the Kingston Central Police Division, has now been declared a zone of special operations. I'm now going to turn to the Commissioner of Police to give his statement. CP.
And good morning to you and other persons on the platform here, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everyone. So the ongoing violence in the Kingston Central Police Division has raised significant concerns. The level of gun violence has contributed to fear in the community and the deaths of a number of members, relatives, and affiliates of the two gangs that have been feuding in that space since last year. There are two main criminal gangs there, and these are supported by affiliate gangs from the surrounding communities. And in spite of a number of them being arrested, a number of them actually being killed by their opponents or cronies in some cases, and those that have fled the country, the feuding continues and the violence continues. I have to note, though, that these gang members are unconcerned about the vulnerable, whether it is a pregnant woman, a child, or the elderly, as they further their own selfish goals. We saw this play out last year, where for the period January 1 to December 31st, i.e. the entire year, the Kingston Central Police Division recorded 79 murders. It's an increase of 55% when compared to the corresponding period of 2020. and the second highest percentage increase among all police divisions. This is an average of about 3 murders every 2 weeks. There was a brief respite from this over that period in November when we implemented another enhanced security measure in that space. But these gang conflicts over that Kingston Central Division affect Almond Town, Rose Gardens, and the downtown business district. And we've also seen some spillover into Kingston East. The Parade Gardens community, which is really the focus of the Zone of Special Operations, recorded 16 of these murders and is ranked among the top 10 communities with the highest murders across the country. A number of these killings have been perpetrated by and on persons who grew up together and have subsequently chosen a life of violence where they resolve conflicts by murder. Families are disrupted, children are deprived of their childhood as they're recruited into the gangs or forced to take on parenting responsibilities for their siblings when their parents are murdered. When I go into Parade Gardens community, like so many other communities, the majority of the citizens only desire to live, better themselves, and raise their families in peace. However, there are those criminals that continue to prey on the people who create fear. They create fear by their presence. They create fear by their ownership of illegal firearms, and they create fear because of their disregard for life. These gangsters don't need to have their weapon on them to create fear in a community, and therefore every measure that we take needs to separate those people who create that kind of fear and diminish the quality of life in a community from that community. So we need to separate them, and the JCF is intent on continuing to take strong action to restore the rule of law and defend these communities from intimidation. And to this end, we will, to the fullest extent of our capacity, and in conjunction with the Jamaica Defense Force and other stakeholders, continue to use the tools available to us as security forces to reduce violence and create the conditions for intervention and development activities to impact these communities. As such, and in consultation with the Acting Chief of Defense Staff, we requested that a zone of special operations be declared in the Parade Gardens community. This enhanced security measure is a reflection of the police's priority to work with other stakeholders to counter the significant and debilitating impact that violent crime continues to have on the residents in the communities. We know that the zones have been effective in reducing violent crimes within the declared space of the zone. We can just look at the other zones of special operations, the 5 others, and we can see the effect of those. As a joint force, we'll continue our law enforcement efforts to give the community a respite from violence and the space to heal and build with the support of other partners. At the same time, we'll continue our relentless pursuit of those who will seek to intimidate even while we are there in the space. Over the last week, we have named persons of interest and those wanted for serious crimes and asked that persons with knowledge of their whereabouts come forward and share this information. We will conduct our duties with the highest level of respect for human rights of all citizens and others who may find themselves in the space or in Jamaica, as we continue to build sustained partnerships with the community. That has been a feature of all of our zones and all of our operations, where we try as best as possible, and even our normal divisional operations, to create partnerships with communities that we serve. As we work to restore public safety, we ask for the patience and understanding of residents and persons doing business in or transiting the declared area. So the public can assist us by contacting Crime Stop at 311, by contacting the Kingston Central Police, and certainly by complying with the requests of security officers at checkpoints and as along the roads and routes in the community, by adhering to curfew guidelines, and by also notifying the JCF of any things that may be that our own members may have done, bring it to our attention very quickly so we can address those matters. For the most part, we have seen our joint forces, our police officers conduct themselves in a very professional manner in all of these enhanced security measures. We will continue to do all that we must to bring this level of violence under control. That responsibility we take seriously. Despite our numerous challenges, the men and women of the JCF remain committed to showing respect for all, observing the rule of law, and remaining a force for good.
Thank you, CP. I'll now invite the Chief of Defence Staff.
Thank you very much, Most Honourable Prime Minister, Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of National Security, Minister with your portfolio in the Ministry, Attorney General, Commissioner, CDS Designate, other members present, members of the press, citizens of Jamaica, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. At dawn today, the Jamaica Defence Force and the Jamaica Constabulary Force deployed to sections of the Parade Gardens community ahead of this morning's declaration of a zone of special operations. The boundaries for this zone is as follows. In the north, beginning at the intersection of East Street and East Queen Street, the boundary extends in an easterly direction along East Queen Street to the intersection of Lower South Camp Road. In the east, the boundary then extends southerly along Lower South Camp Road to the intersection with Harbour Street. In the south, continuing from the intersection with Harbour Street, the boundary extends westerly along Harbour Street to the intersection with East Queen Street. In the west, the boundary then extends in another direction along East Street and terminates at the intersection with East Queen Street. The zone of special operations will give the security forces temporary, certainly the JDF, temporary additional powers of search, arrest, and detention. We believe this is necessary in order to give the security forces the space necessary to carry out the operational tasks that will be required to help bring a sense of normalcy to the community. While we acknowledge that persons may be concerned about the implications of the internal security operations as they go about their day-to-day business, we want to assure citizens that both the JDF and JCF troops have been adequately trained and oriented to ensure the protection of the human rights of all Jamaicans. We will continue this approach in Parade Gardens, and we urge persons to acquaint themselves with the regulations and requirements governing a ZOSO in order to easily and conveniently transit the area as they go about their lawful business. During this period of the ZOSO, citizens will encounter various operations to include vehicle checkpoints and mobile patrols. The purpose of these operational activities is not to inconvenience citizens, but rather to add a robust element of security for residents as well as other citizens transiting the area. As noted before, a critical element of our success will be the cooperation and support that we get from the citizens. And we therefore urge you to, in addition to the JCF tip line of 311 mentioned by the Commissioner, you can also call the JDF tip line 876-837-8888. As the Prime Minister outlined, the ZOSO is really a long-term strategy, but with very desirable short-term effects. You may recall in our Strategic Defense Review, we outlined our perspective of taking a short, medium, and long-term approach applied simultaneously while having different durations to address the culture of violence in Jamaica by having youth engagement and community development. The ZOSO provides exactly that opportunity for community development. And while we continue to build out the defense, security, and justice system in the medium term, the short-term impact of cauterizing the unacceptable high levels of homicides is also one of the effects we will achieve from the ZOSO. In closing, let me reaffirm that the JDF and JCF are committed to achieve success here in Parade Gardens. We welcome the continued support that we have received from citizens and the various other groups, including the private sector, as we strive to achieve lasting peace within our communities. Thank you.
Prime Minister, Minister within the Ministry, Minister Samudio, Commissioner of Police, our Chief of Staff and CS Designate, and those listening in the audience here and abroad, and our journalists. The level of criminal violence in Central Kingston has been a major concern. This area is home to hundreds of hardworking, law-abiding Jamaicans. It is a location of critical government institutions such as the Court District and the very seat of government. Central Kingston, however, is a part of the southern crescent of the corporate area that comprises of 4 police divisions and provides some result in some 40% of the homicides across Jamaica. In response to gang-related violence within Central Kingston, specifically over the last 12 months in particular, the police intensified and expanded their operations. Search, curfew and searches, intelligence-driven activities, operations, and assignment of additional special operation teams within the area, taking place on a most intensive basis in Central Kingston. As a result of the intensive activity, several gang leaders have been apprehended or in custody. Several migrated, and even in their new jurisdiction, they have been killing their fellow gang members. The hostility is intense and persistent. The brazenness of the criminals in this area reflected in the cowardly attack that took the life of a 10-year-old Jezreel Tyrell a few days back. But immediately after a 96-hour curfew in the very area, as a result of that event, there was a killing, and almost the very next day, as the police, as we moved out of the curfew activity. Intelligence here suggests that in spite of some degrading of the gangs, as a result of intense police action, there is need for further action within Central Kingston. The situation in Central Kingston demands special security measures. The clear hold and build strategy of the Zones of Special Operation is one such tool that can be used not only to reduce the immediate homicide rate, but to provide a basis for community transformation, as this is one of the communities identified over time as one that requires special social investment. It is not a replacement for a state of public emergency. The suite of development interventions that are made available under the Zone of Special Operation is designed to bring about social transformation and prevent and reduce not only the criminal violence in there, which is near anarchic, restore a sense of normalcy and safety to the community within that space. It's one of the tools that the government is using to restore law and order in central Kingston and across several communities in Jamaica. The government has been clear that we are not relying on any one tool to secure Jamaica. We will utilize all available tools to restore order, public safety, and remove violence from communities, legislative, as well as security measures. Communities must be assessed based on their peculiarities in order to determine the exact security intervention that may be required to restore some sense of safety and normalcy within the community. There is no magic bullet, and it will not work overnight. The zone of special operation in particular is a long-term, medium-term activity, but there is a benefit of immediate reduction in homicides in those areas. Object is save lives, restore order, and pursue transformative activity. It has been receiving intensive policing activities, but intelligence-driven operations were intensified within central Kingston prior to today's declaration. The level of criminal violence in central Kingston is challenging to normal policing activities, but I am confident that the Police High Command and the Jamaica Defence Force will continue to make necessary adjustments within the zones of special operation to increase police effectiveness and restore a sense of normalcy to the area. Having this zone of special operation within central Kingston will add to the effectiveness of the police and security forces in the area and restore a sense of safety in the environment and continue rehabilitation of the downtown Kingston. The population of central Kingston deserves to have public safety and good order in their community. The declaration of the public zone of special operation is designed to do this, and I'm confident it will in fact succeed as they have done where they have been declared elsewhere. Thank
you. Minister Chang, we're keeping to our time specified. We now turn to the question and answer segment. Just to inform you that we have our Attorney General here, we have the Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of National Security, and we have the CDS designate who are also here with us. Questions?
Thank you, Prime Minister. Just to reiterate, sir, ahead of the press conference, we did go through the media some protocols. We asked that they limit to 2 questions each time so that everyone is able to follow the questions that are asked so that we are able to respond and get in as many as possible. So then let's start with Ms. Candice Houghton, who is from the Star newspaper. Candice?
Good morning, everybody, and that's I'm representing the Jamaica Observer, not Star.
Beg your pardon, Candice. Go ahead, please, and thank you so much.
All right, no problem. My question is for the Prime Minister. Mr. Holness, you said the zone of operation is more than is a strategic that is not a displace, that is not only for displacement. You mentioned building peace in the communities. What I want to know is how will you ensure that after the zone of operations end, the criminals not return to the communities and wreak havoc, considering that that's a trend we've observed?
Returning to the communities. For the 5 communities now, 6 that we have put in place, the peace has held and held significantly. If you look at all of them, the historical crime activities in the communities that we have declared zones of special operation are far higher than the present state when they are under a zone of special operation. So the criminals have not returned. And even if criminals have returned, the communities have been so hardened that they are not able to carry out their criminal activities. So, to be clear, the first thing that we want to do in a zone of special operation is the clear phase. So we go in, we conduct security operations that remove the criminals out of the area. Then secondly, we enter into the hold phase, or rather it is the build phase and then the hold. We enter into the hold phase. And in that phase, the security forces establish themselves and establish their protocols and policies and procedures as to how people enter the community. They do enforcement of public order, and they carry out special operations, particularly dynamic operations having to do with searches and interdiction. And whilst those two phases are ongoing, clear phase moving into the hold phase, the build phase is being planned. And in the build phase, as you would have seen in almost all the communities that we have intervened in this way, we start with dealing with infrastructure as quickly as possible, whether it is the repair of roads, the removal of zinc fences, the fixing of gullies and drains, putting in sewage, and these help in a significant way. It does change the attitude of the community members towards their community. They start to take ownership of their community. And then we go in with other activities such as training, such as helping citizens to get their documentation, parenting, entrepreneurship, all kinds of other support. And then we go into other areas after. We deal with things such as titling, developing citizens groups to establish leadership of the community, and we give support to all kinds of community activities, particularly working with youngsters for sporting activities and training activities. And it is these measures which they are not new, they are not novel. We have always had a strategy of community intervention, but what we have not had, and which is what the zones of special operations give us, it is the working together in a synergistic and coordinated way to have the security forces working in parallel with the social intervention in a targeted way. And we believe that this will give the best results. It is a long-term strategy. It is not going to happen overnight. It will take time, but it will work. And we have seen where it has worked.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I think I'm now back on track with where all the members of the media are. So let's go to Ms. Janet Silvera, who represents the Jamaica Gleaner. Good morning, Janet.
Good morning. Thank you very much. My questions are you sympathetic to suggestions, this is to the Prime Minister, that extensions of SOEs should be reachable with simple majority votes instead of 2/3 votes, and is that part of the constitutional push for reform for 2022? Next question, will government lawmakers seek to have consultation outside of Parliament?
I'm sorry, Janet.
Sorry, Janet, you fell off, but your first question was an excellent question. Do you want to repeat your second?
All right. So where would you like me to start?
We didn't hear your second question.
Okay, my second question is, will government lawmakers seek to have consultation outside Parliament to ensure SOEs will have the buy-in by all parties before having a stalemate in Parliament?
Two very good questions, Janet. Let me start with your second question. In the previous iterations of the SOEs, there was consultation, collaboration between the government and the opposition, which saw an agreement that where the murder rate per 100,000 is above a certain number, I believe it was 35, if I'm not mistaken. 32 per 100,000, then the use of the SOEs would be considered reasonable and justified. This is now not from a constitutional perspective, just merely from a public policy standpoint and in terms of building public support. You are right. There probably now needs to be a renewed effort at a wider cross-section of social engagement, including the opposition, including other stakeholders, particularly citizens and commercial interests, as to how the government can use this very effective tool to help to curb the murder rate that is affecting everyone. So, short answer to your second question is yes, and that process I intend to engage. Your first question is wrapped up in all kinds of constitutional issues. The AG is here. I'll give her an opportunity to respond to you. But simply to say that we have to take a very sophisticated view of the threats that the nation faces. I've spent a lot of time evaluating the commentary of citizens about our national security. And what is absent from the commentary, from people who should know and people who probably are just ordinary citizens would not know, is that the threats come in all forms. And sometimes the threats come in forms that the public popularly accept. And in that is the danger. The threats are in guns that are widely available, and there is a culture surrounding its use, even its defense. There is a view that it is okay, it is acceptable to have a gun, illegal firearm, to protect yourself. Then there is the acceptance of dons and gangs. There are communities that feel that dons are legitimate to control space, dispense justice, and give benefits. And we say even some points that they have sovereignty. And of course, there is the devaluation of life, where people believe that taking another life is acceptable in the resolution of a conflict, going as far as to hire people to take others' lives for simple things. So these issues are our threat, and we are now at a state with these threats that we need to have the powers to address them over and above what is considered normal, because these threats are at a level that are not normal, and we are seeing that in the murder rate. So we are in a state of emergency. Whether or not you agree that it is constitutionally so is a different issue from what the actual state of play is. And if anyone doesn't recognize that we are in a state of emergency, which by definition means that you have to use exceptional powers to treat with those issues, then those persons don't live in Jamaica. They are blind, or they have a particular political motive to see the government's efforts fail for their political benefit. And I think the country ought to look at that and examine that carefully. Who is it that has your safety and protection of your life at heart? Who has the care and the concern to get it done? So my answer to you is yes, there may very well need to be constitutional reforms to have a far more sophisticated and realistic view of how the government uses extraordinary powers to treat with extraordinary situations. AG.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The emergency powers provisions are set out at Section 20 of the Constitution, and also in two ordinary pieces of legislation, the Emergency Powers Act and the Emergency Security Forces Act. When the powers are used, they are operationalized in emergency powers regulations. What we have are provisions borrowed from the United Kingdom, and they largely reflect wartime powers. And so there is undoubtedly a need to update those provisions. There are competing views as to how emergency powers are to be used. But the better view from the research done is that these are powers that are given to a government to use when they assess it necessary to do so. Using emergency powers in a politically competitive context, which needs the buy-in of the opposition, may sometimes create a problem where there is competition for the political reins. So there are competing views on the matter. We know that what we now have, which came in the amendments in 2011, actually reflected problems that were faced in Jamaica in the use of the emergency powers in yesteryear. And so, like every jurisdiction, from time to time, you have to revise your laws, revise the Constitution, and see whether how you provide for powers, how you provide for institutions, whether they really make sense. So the short answer is that what we have will have to be looked at again, and also expand the suite of emergency powers. In the UK, for example, there is no domestic terrorism, which enables the government to respond in an emergency way to matters happening within the jurisdiction. So short answer is yes, and we will have to look at everything. And it is not to be seen as taking power from anyone. But the truth is that in a democracy, an elected government is elected to govern and must govern. And the information that you have in government is certainly very different from what you have in opposition. And the burden is on the elected government to govern.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Mrs. Marlene Malahoo Fort. Let's go to Mr. Ricardo Brooks from Nationwide News Network. Ricardo?
Thank you very much, Naomi. Good morning, Prime Minister. Conceivably, you would require the support of the opposition to overcome that 2/3 threshold for the declaration of the SOE. Have you yet met with the opposition leader to forecast to him that you intend to lower that threshold? And if yes, what's been the response? Also, are you satisfied in light of the rising COVID cases that the current measures should remain through to January 13th?
Let me answer your first question, and I'll think about answering your second question. First question is, the government is doing its internal review of the constitutional arrangements that would allow for the use of the SOEs. As the Attorney General said, it was not always the case that 2/3 majority was required. That change was made in light of how the emergency powers were used in the past. The Attorney General made a very important point. The Emergency Powers Act that we have, their origins are out of the World War II protection of the realm. So they were designed to be used against an external threat. But when you use them with citizens, you can run into difficulty as it relates to the citizens' rights. And in particular, with our now established Charter of Rights, it makes it even more difficult. So we have legislative tools that are not fit for purpose. What countries have recognized is that, as I've said before, the view of the threat is very outdated and unsophisticated. The threats are oftentimes now internal, and you can't define them and exclude them from your citizens. And therefore, you have to now go and recraft your legislation to specifically define how you will use extraordinary powers within your country against citizens while still protecting their rights as citizens, even if they are criminals. So we have to take a very in-depth view of this. So we have not yet, well, to be fair, we have signaled to the opposition in the past, but we have not signaled to the opposition under its new leadership. And we will now have to move to that once we have within ourselves established exactly how we're going to reform these measures. As it stands now, the requirement for a 2/3 majority can pose a significant difficulty. Imagine if there is a situation where there is a threat that the government needs to act and maintain its action. And the opposition say, well, we are not convinced of that threat, even if we share information, even if it's obvious, and lives are lost. Then the state, the government, is hobbled in its ability to respond to a threat. Which is what we are now seeing playing out with the inability to have the SOEs executed. There is a clear and present danger. There is a clear threat, but we are not able, even though we have attempted to, because the opposition has blocked it. In the past, the opposition has worked with the program. They have seen the issues, and many of their MPs and their own constituents have called for states of public emergency because they see that it has worked and it hasn't deprived anyone of their life or property. So, yes, there is a political problem, and we need to solve that political problem, and we also need to solve the constitutional and legal problems so that we are able to have a far more sophisticated and well thought out use of emergency powers to deal with the new and evolving threats to our society, including threats that are not just citizen to citizen, but threats now that are directly targeted to the state and its sovereignty over Jamaican territory.
Thank you, sir. It's now 10 minutes to 11 o'clock. Let's see if we can get as many questions in as possible before 11 o'clock. Ms. Tanisha Mundell, you're next. Good morning.
Good morning, Prime Minister. My question is for you. Two questions. Good morning, Prime Minister. My question is for you. Two questions. Are SOEs preferred to ZOZOs primarily because of the two prongs of detention without charge and soldiers being able to act independently of the police? My second question is, are we planning to return to lockdowns? If lockdowns are off the table, what other strategies will be implemented to halt the current COVID-19 wave?
I wasn't planning on turning this into a COVID conversation, but I know there is great tension in the air. And what it says to me is that people are not listening to what I have said. I have been very clear in Parliament, very clear, absolutely gone overboard to say we are not going back to lockdown. So be calm. And I've said what the strategy is. It is now in your hands. Go and take the vaccine. That is the strategy. We can't hold it down and put an eagle in your hand. If you get sick, you will take that responsibility. There is an option. We have vaccines all over the place. We have sites all over the place. I don't hear one person complain that they can't get the vaccine anywhere. Go and get vaccinated. Argument done. Now, as it relates to the preference of the zone of special operations over the SOEs, there's no preference. There are two different tools. As I said, one tool is meant to intervene for a long-term commitment for peace building and community development. It can only be applied in certain circumstances. Circumstance number one, obviously, you have to have the escalating crime and violence, the community being captured, so that when you enter and you displace, you bring the crime and murder immediately down. But you need to be able to conduct certain types of policing activities, and those activities are usually around infrastructure. So you can do your, what is called your law and order, your public order activities. And then you can intervene in improving infrastructure. So we usually want to target urban communities communities with established layout of grids, roads, that kind of ingress, egress. It can't be in communities where you have a large swath of land, which there are no points that you can control ingress and egress. So it's a specifically defined tool, and it is usually urban in terms of its target area. It can be applied in some rural areas, but so far we have seen where the tool is best applied so far in urban areas with those features. And it works. It works like a charm. It works well, but it is resource intense. And the resource commitment is long term. So we can't just put in the forces today and then take them out tomorrow to go to another community. Once the forces are committed, they are committed, and that means they are not there for another community. So there's another strategy being deployed, which is not front-facing, which is increasing the capabilities of the force in terms of manpower. And there are two strategies being operated. One is increasing the capacity and size of the JDF through the JNSC to get more trainees in and have them deployed quickly so that we can have them doing the peacekeeping and the community building operations. So too with the JCF, they are increasing their recruitment, but the COVID pandemic, as obviously you would have seen, our recruitment, especially in the JDF, would have dropped significantly. I know the JCF has had much better success, but it is a resource-intense operation. And then we have to now mobilize the infrastructure support. And through the EU, and I give great commendation to our development partners in the EU, and of course, DFID as well as assisted, we are getting support, budgetary support, in implementing through JCIF the community development strategies, and they are working. Now, the SOE is a totally different strategy. The SOE, we have not deployed it nationally, but it can be deployed nationally. We have chosen to deploy it in a limited geographical area, but mostly our surrounding parishes, because we want to use the powers in as broad a geographical limit as possible. So the SOE is about the deterrence. It is about getting into the custody of the police those who we have intelligence on and who we know are the ones pulling the trigger, killing the people. So the question comes, my dear friend journalists, why you don't just arrest them? Well, we have, and they have been given bail, and they have come back out and they have committed the crimes again. In fact, they have killed the witnesses. So the question is, so why you don't take them to court? There are no witnesses to take them to court. Nobody's coming to court. These are practical concerns that our security forces have to address. The criminals know this. They know this. And that is how they are operating. If you were to just examine the statistics to see persons who the police would have gone through the normal policing procedure, interdicted them, arrested, put them through the courts, they are out on bail and commit murder again. Now, in a situation where you see this escalating, the government can't just sit back and fold its arms. We must be able to pursue the criminals. And those that we have detained, we have been very scrupulous, very careful about maintaining their human rights. I can't tell you we have been perfect, but any Jamaican comparing how SOEs have been used in the past versus how we have used the SOEs now must admit that the government has made great efforts. And yes, it can be refined, and we have sought to refine it at each iteration to improve. But until we resolve the constitutional issues, then we simply don't have that power. And until we get the support of the opposition, we simply don't have that power. Now, the SOE can immediately bring down murders in a defined geographical area, immediately, and keep it down. Why? Simple. The people who are committing the murders are usually the people. A high percentage of them are those that the SOEs target. They're not out there being able to intimidate communities, kill witnesses, and commit more murders. They're just simply not. They are in the detention of the police. And don't you think, as reasonable, rational citizens, that that power should be there under proper and careful use to protect and preserve the lives of every Jamaican, the innocent Jamaican people? So there are two different tools. They have two different uses, but they both contribute to the reduction in murders.
Thank you, sir.
Next question. We're at 11 o'clock, which is our planned time.
Thank you, sir. And so at 11 o'clock, may I just inform the media, we'll take one more question, and then we will wrap. My apologies to those who have follow-up questions. I do note that Janet has her hand up again for follow-up questions, and those who are still in queue to ask questions, but we did allot an hour. And so the final question will go to Mr. Andre Wright, the editor at The Gleaner. Andre?
Yes, pleasant good morning, Mr. Holness. Did the government seek legal advice on its decision to disengage with so-called sovereign maroons? And would the government not be derelict in refusing to finance projects in any such territories? And the companion question is whether the government finds it embarrassing that it seems that different arms of the state, that's the police, and ODPEM, as we found out, gave approval to the hosting of the Maroon celebrations.
Your question is based on a very dangerous premise. And I said earlier that there are some threats that the average citizen looking on might think it is innocuous, it is popular, and take a liking to it, because the discussions that are held in places that should know better does not highlight the threat. Jamaica is a unitary, sovereign state. There is no other sovereign authority in Jamaica other than the government of Jamaica. I want that to be absolutely clear. None. And under my leadership, not 1 inch of Jamaica will come under any other sovereign authority. What you are asking would be another for the government of Jamaica to take taxpayers' money and grant funds to fund another government. This is not a government saying they are a local government, a parish council government, which is under our constitution. Are you crazy? Really? Do you know what you're asking? This is the stuff of how guerrilla wars come and states break down. Wake up, Jamaica. Don't court foolishness and problems. Wake up. People have died as a result. And you expect me to stand there as Prime Minister and fund activities that could lead to the breakdown of our state? Never. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister, for the hosting the press conference this morning. Also with the Prime Minister, the Minister of National Security, Dr. the Honourable Horace Chang, the Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of National Security, Senator the Honourable Matthew Samuda, as well as the CDS, Lieutenant General Rocky Meade, and the CDS designate, Commodore Antoinette Weaves Gorman, and of course, the country's Commissioner of Police, Major General Anthony Anderson. Also joining the Prime Minister was the country's Attorney General, Mrs. Marlene Malahou Fort. Thank you so much to members of the media for joining us and all persons who are tuned in. Thank you so much and have a wonderful Sunday afternoon. Happy New Year once again.